Imagine the crackling warmth of your Christmas fireplace. Now imagine it's not warmth at all, but a chilling window to something ancient and evil. We found a portal hidden within the hearth, leading to a dimension of eternal ice-bound torment. You need to see this because this Christmas some fires burn much, much colder. Eleanor Marsh had always believed that inheriting her grandmother's Victorian manor in the remote hills of Vermont was the greatest gift she had ever received. The sprawling estate, with its dark timber frames and frost-kissed windows, seemed pulled directly from a Christmas postcard. Snow blanketed the grounds in pristine white layers, and icicles hung from the eaves like crystalline ornaments. But the true centerpiece of the home, the element that had drawn Eleanor back every holiday season since childhood, was the grand fireplace in the main parlor. The hearth was magnificent, crafted from ancient stone that her grandmother claimed predated the house itself. Intricate carvings adorned its mantel, depicting winter scenes that Eleanor had always assumed were merely decorative. Holly branches intertwined with what appeared to be dancing figures, though upon closer inspection, their poses seemed less celebratory and more frantic, as if fleeing from something unseen. The stone itself was a peculiar shade of gray, almost blue in certain light, and it held a chill even when flames roared within its belly. This Christmas Eve marked Eleanor's first holiday in the manor as its sole owner. Her grandmother had passed in early spring, leaving behind the estate and a leather-bound journal filled with cryptic entries that Eleanor had yet to fully explore. She had arrived 3 days prior, determined to honor her grandmother's memory by celebrating the season exactly as they had done together for decades. The tree stood decorated in the corner, strung with vintage ornaments and tinsel that caught the firelight in brilliant flashes. Stockings hung from hooks embedded in the ancient stone, and the scent of pine and cinnamon permeated every room. As evening descended and the winter sun surrendered to encroaching darkness, Eleanor settled into the worn velvet armchair facing the hearth. The fire she had built earlier crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows across the wallpapered walls. Outside, wind howled through the barren trees, but within the parlor, all seemed peaceful and warm. She sipped mulled wine from her grandmother's favorite crystal glass and allowed herself a moment of contentment. That contentment shattered when she noticed the flame. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of tired eyes. One tongue of fire among the many seemed to flicker differently, moving against the natural current of the blaze rather than with it. It pulsed with a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, almost alive. Eleanor leaned forward, squinting through the heat shimmer. The anomalous flame was distinctly colder in color, more blue than orange, and it seemed to reach toward the back of the hearth as if pointing to something hidden in the stone. A sound followed, though calling it a sound felt inadequate. It was more of a sensation, a vibration that settled deep in Eleanor's chest and resonated through her bones. Like whispered words spoken in a language she could not comprehend, yet somehow recognized. The temperature in the room shifted subtly, and despite the roaring fire, goosebumps erupted across her arms. She stood abruptly, spilling wine across her wool sweater, and backed away from the hearth. The fire returned to normal almost immediately, the strange blue flame vanishing as if it had never existed. The whispered sensation faded, leaving only the familiar crackle of burning wood and a distant moan of wind. Eleanor stood frozen, her heart pounding, telling herself she had imagined the entire episode. But her grandmother's journal called to her from the side table where she had left it earlier. With trembling hands, Eleanor retrieved the worn leather volume and began flipping through its yellowed pages. Her grandmother's elegant handwriting filled entry after entry with recipes, household notes, and fond memories of Christmases past. Yet as Eleanor progressed deeper into the journal, the tone shifted dramatically. Entries became fragmented, words underlined multiple times, and strange symbols appeared in the margins. One passage, dated December 23rd from nearly 40 years prior, stopped Eleanor cold. "The fireplace spoke again last night," her grandmother had written. "The old words, the ones my mother warned me never to speak aloud. I have kept the seals maintained as she taught me, renew them every solstice as instructed. But I fear they are weakening. The cold behind the fire grows stronger each year. Whatever waits beyond that threshold grows impatient. I pray I will be strong enough to hold it at bay until my time ends. And I pray Eleanor never learns the truth of what we guard." Eleanor read the passage 3 times, her mind struggling to process the implications. Seals? A threshold? What exactly had her grandmother been guarding all these years, and why had she never spoken of it? She looked up at the fireplace, at the cheerful flames dancing within the ancient stone frame. The carvings on the mantel seemed different now, more sinister in the flickering light. Those dancing figures no longer appeared festive. Their mouths were open in silent screams, their arms raised not in celebration but in desperate plea. The fire crackled, and somewhere deep within its heart, that strange blue flame flickered once more, pulsing like a cold and patient heartbeat. Eleanor knew she should leave, should pack her bags and return to the safety of her city apartment. But the mystery held her rooted in place, a terrible curiosity overriding her growing fear. Whatever secrets the fireplace concealed, whatever truth her grandmother had spent decades protecting, Eleanor needed to understand. She had no way of knowing that her quest for answers would lead her to the threshold of something far worse than any nightmare. That the warmth she had always associated with Christmas and comfort was merely a mask, a veil concealing a gateway to frozen damnation. The fireplace crackled again, and the temperature in the room dropped another degree. Sleep proved impossible that night. Eleanor lay in her grandmother's bed, staring at the ceiling while frost crept across the window panes in intricate patterns. Her mind replayed the strange flame and the haunting journal entry in an endless loop. By dawn's gray light, she had made her decision. She would investigate the fireplace thoroughly, using every resource at her disposal to uncover the truth her grandmother had died protecting. She began with the journal, reading every entry from cover to cover. The early pages contained nothing unusual, mundane accounts of daily life spanning decades. But the final third of the journal told a different story entirely. Her grandmother wrote of the cold that lives in fire, of ancient family obligations passed down through generations, and of rituals performed each winter solstice to keep the gates sealed. There were references to her great-grandmother, and to women before her stretching back centuries, all tasked with the same mysterious duty. One entry mentioned a hidden compartment behind a loose stone in the hearth's left interior wall. Eleanor dressed quickly and descended to the parlor, where the fireplace sat cold and silent, ashes from the previous night's blaze still piled within. She knelt on the stone floor, ignoring the chill that seeped through her clothing, and began pressing against the interior stones one by one. On her 7th attempt, a stone shifted beneath her palm. Eleanor's breath caught as she pried it loose, revealing a narrow cavity carved into the wall itself. Inside, wrapped in rotting velvet, lay a collection of items that sent ice through her veins. There was a small bronze mirror, its surface tarnished to near blackness. A bundle of dried herbs tied with red thread. Several pages of parchment covered in symbols that matched those in her grandmother's journal. And finally, a dagger with a blade that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Eleanor carried the items to the dining table and spread them out carefully. The parchment pages appeared ancient, written in a language she could not identify, though crude illustrations depicted scenes of horror. Figures cowered before a massive gateway wreathed in flames that burned black. Creatures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes emerged from the portal, dragging screaming victims into darkness beyond. And at the center of each illustration stood the unmistakable shape of a fireplace, its stones carved with the same patterns that adorned her grandmother's hearth. She retrieved her laptop and began researching, cross-referencing the symbols with online databases of ancient languages and occult imagery. Hours passed as she fell deeper into a rabbit hole of esoteric knowledge. The symbols matched fragments of a dead language once spoken in the northern reaches of Scandinavia, associated with cults that worshipped entities existing beyond the boundaries of the physical world. These cults believed that certain locations served as thin points between dimensions, and that fire, rather than being merely destructive, could serve as a window between realms. One academic paper referenced the legend of Hellfrost, a dimension of eternal winter ruled by beings that fed on warmth and joy. According to the legend, these entities could not cross into our world except during specific astronomical alignments, and only through gateways that had been properly consecrated. The winter solstice was mentioned repeatedly as a time of particular danger. Eleanor checked her calendar and felt her stomach drop. The winter solstice was tomorrow night. She returned to the fireplace with the bronze mirror, remembering something her grandmother had written about using it to see what the flames conceal. The tarnished surface revealed nothing when held toward regular light, but when Eleanor positioned it to catch the morning sun streaming through the parlor windows and angled it toward the cold hearth, something shifted in the reflection. The mirror showed not the empty fireplace she stood before, but an active blaze, flames dancing within the stone frame. And beyond those flames, visible through gaps in the fire as if through a window, stretched a landscape of impossible horror. A frozen wasteland extended to a distant horizon beneath a sky of swirling gray. Twisted shapes that might have been trees clawed at the heavy clouds, their branches coated in ice so thick it resembled glass. And moving among those frozen trees, barely visible in the mirror's corrupted reflection, were figures that defied description. Eleanor dropped the mirror with a cry, and it clattered against the stone floor. The vision vanished, replaced by the normal view of an empty hearth. Her hands shook violently as she backed away, nearly tripping over the armchair in her haste. The fireplace was a gateway. The legends were true. And whatever lay on the other side had been clawing at the barrier for centuries, waiting for its chance to break through. She gathered the hidden items in the journal and spread them across the dining table once more, this time searching desperately for any mention of how to reinforce the seals her grandmother had maintained. The ritual pages were detailed but complex, requiring specific herbs burned at specific times, words spoken in that ancient dead language, and blood drawn from the guardian's own veins. Her grandmother had performed this ritual every winter solstice for 40 years. Now, with the old woman gone and the solstice mere hours away, the seals had gone unrenewed. Eleanor could feel the weakness in the barrier, though she could not explain how. A coldness emanated from the fireplace that had nothing to do with the absent fire, a chill that crept into the very air of the room. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the parlor floor, Eleanor made her choice. She would attempt the ritual, would try to seal the gateway as her grandmother and ancestors had done before her. She had no other option. If she fled, if she left the portal unattended, whatever lurked beyond would eventually break through. She began preparing, gathering the required materials and studying the ritual instructions with desperate intensity. Behind her, unnoticed, the ashes in the fireplace stirred as if disturbed by a wind that did not exist. And deep within the cold stone, something ancient began to wake. The sun set with unsettling speed, as if the light itself fled from what the coming night would bring. Eleanor worked by candlelight, having discovered that electric lights flickered and died whenever she drew close to the fireplace. The temperature in the parlor had dropped steadily throughout the afternoon, and now her breath misted in the air despite the complete absence of any open windows or doors. She had arranged the ritual components according to her grandmother's instructions. The dried herbs formed a circle around the hearth's opening. The dagger lay waiting on a clean cloth, its lightless blade seeming to hum with anticipation. The parchment pages were pinned to the mantel with iron nails, their symbols facing the cold stone as if serving as warnings or wards. And the bronze mirror sat propped against the armchair, angled to catch any change in the fireplace's appearance. According to the journal, the ritual needed to be performed at the exact moment of the solstice, when the boundary between dimensions grew thinnest. Eleanor had calculated the time using an astronomical website, and the hour approached with terrifying inevitability. She sat in the darkness, watching the dead fireplace, waiting for midnight to arrive. At 11:43, the first change occurred. The ashes within the hearth began to glow. Not with the warm orange of natural embers, but with an ethereal blue light that pulsed like a diseased heartbeat. The glow intensified gradually, casting the parlor in sickly illumination that made shadows dance in wrong directions. Eleanor pressed herself deeper into the armchair, her fingers wrapped around the bronze mirror's handle, and watched as the impossible unfolded before her. The blue glow coalesced into flames that rose from the ashes without any fuel to sustain them. These flames burned cold, so cold that frost formed on the stones surrounding the hearth and crept across the floor toward Eleanor's feet. The fire grew taller, reaching toward the flue, and within its frozen heart, the gateway began to open. She raised the mirror and looked through its tarnished surface. What she saw would haunt her for whatever remained of her life. The frozen landscape stretched endlessly, a wasteland of ice and despair that existed in complete opposition to every concept of warmth and hope. Mountains of black ice rose in the distance, their peaks lost in swirling clouds that churned with malevolent purpose. The ground was covered in snow that gleamed with an inner light, as if the land itself radiated cold rather than merely containing it. No sun hung in the gray sky, yet everything was visible in that terrible pallid luminescence. Trees dotted the landscape, if they could still be called trees. They had been twisted by unimaginable cold into tortured shapes, their branches reaching toward the sky like the arms of drowning victims. Ice encased every surface, thick and ancient, and within that ice Eleanor could see frozen forms that might once have been leaves or birds or things far less natural. Nothing moved among those trees, yet she sensed awareness everywhere, countless eyes watching from concealed positions. Then the inhabitants revealed themselves. They emerged from behind ice formations and frozen trees, creatures that bore only passing resemblance to anything human. Their bodies were elongated, stretched thin as if pulled by forces beyond comprehension. Skin the color of frozen meat clung to visible bones, and their faces were smooth expanses broken only by mouths filled with needle teeth and eyes that glowed with the same sickly blue as the flames. They moved with jerking, insectal motions, limbs bending at impossible angles as they approached the gateway from their side. One creature pressed itself against the barrier, and Eleanor felt the impact vibrate through the mirror into her hands. Its mouth opened, revealing a throat that descended into infinite darkness, and it spoke words that carved themselves directly into Eleanor's consciousness. The guardian has fallen. The seals have weakened. The feast approaches. More creatures gathered behind the first, dozens of them, then hundreds, filling the frozen landscape as far as Eleanor could perceive. They pressed against the barrier with increasing force, and she could see the gateway flex inward with each assault. Frost exploded across the parlor walls, coating paintings and furniture in white crystalline patterns that spread like disease. Eleanor dropped the mirror and scrambled backward as the blue flames surged higher. The temperature in the room plummeted to dangerous levels, and she could feel her exposed skin beginning to burn from the impossible cold. The creatures' voices merged into a chorus of hunger and anticipation, speaking promises of eternal frozen torment that would make death seem like mercy. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the assault ceased. The blue flames retreated, shrinking back into the ashes until only a faint glow remained. The frost stopped spreading, though it did not recede. The creatures' voices faded to whispers, then to silence. Eleanor lay on the frozen floor, gasping for breath that crystallized before her eyes, and stared at the fireplace with complete understanding. They had been testing the barrier, probing for weaknesses, preparing for the true assault that would come at midnight, at the exact moment of the solstice when the boundary between dimensions grew weakest. She had perhaps 15 minutes to prepare. Eleanor forced herself upright on numb legs and approached the hearth once more. The journal's ritual instructions seemed pitifully inadequate against what she had witnessed, a few herbs and words against an army of frozen nightmares. But it was all she had, the only defense her ancestors had developed across centuries of guardianship. She began the preparations, her movements clumsy with cold and fear, racing against time as midnight approached with the certainty of an executioner's blade. Behind her, the mirror she had dropped lay face up on the floor, and reflected in its tarnished surface, the creatures of the frozen realm gathered before the gateway, their hollow eyes burning with patience, waiting for their moment of release. Midnight arrived not with silence, but with sound. It began as a distant melody, carried on impossible winds that whistled through the sealed house. Eleanor recognized the tune with growing horror. Silent Night, the most beloved of Christmas carols, played in minor key and sung by voices that had never been human. The notes twisted and corrupted, transforming from celebration into lamentation, from peace into despair. The blue flames erupted from the fireplace with explosive force, shattering the ring of protective herbs and sending Eleanor sprawling backward. The fire reached ceiling height in seconds, yet spread no warmth whatsoever. Instead, the cold intensified until the very air seemed to crystallize, each breath drawing shards of ice into Eleanor's lungs. Within the flames, the gateway opened fully. The barrier that had held for centuries cracked like thin ice under tremendous weight. Eleanor watched fissures spread through something invisible yet tangible, a membrane between dimensions that her ancestors had reinforced with blood and ritual across countless generations. The creatures on the other side pressed forward with renewed fury, and the membrane bulged inward, ready to burst. But it was not the creatures that emerged first. A figure stepped through the flames, and Eleanor's mind recoiled from its appearance. It wore the shape of a man or something that remembered what men looked like, but every detail was wrong. Its body was constructed from compacted snow and ancient ice, perfectly formed yet utterly lifeless. It wore robes that might have been red once, but centuries in the frozen dimension had bleached them to the color of old bones. A beard hung from its face, not of hair but of icicles that clicked together with each movement. And its eyes, set deep in a face of frozen flesh, burned with the same terrible blue light as the flames. A corrupted St. Nicholas, twisted by eternal winter into something that brought not gifts but endless suffering. The entity surveyed the parlor with those burning eyes, taking in the Christmas decorations with what might have been amusement. It reached one frozen claw toward the stockings hanging from the mantel and touched them gently. Frost exploded across the fabric, and Eleanor watched the cheerful designs blacken and crumble as if aged 1,000 years in seconds. So long since the barrier weakened, the entity spoke, its voice the creak of glaciers and the howl of blizzards. So long since we tasted the warmth of your world, the feast of your joy. Behind it, more figures emerged through the gateway. Smaller forms that capered and giggled with sounds like breaking glass. They might have been elves once, in whatever corrupted mythology spawned this nightmare, but now they were things of teeth and hunger, ice-formed bodies scuttling across walls and ceiling with insectal speed. The entity that wore Santa's form approached the Christmas tree, and Eleanor could only watch in frozen horror as it extended its arms in mockery of blessing. The tree transformed instantly, its green needles turning white with frost, its ornaments cracking and falling, its lights flickering to that terrible blue before dying entirely. The presents beneath the tree aged and rotted, their cheerful wrapping paper becoming brittle and yellow before crumbling to dust. Every gift shall be ash, the entity intoned. Every carol shall be screaming. Every warmth shall be endless cold. This is our purpose. This is why we wait behind the flames. To claim what was promised to us, long before your kind understood what winter truly means. Eleanor found her voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. What are you? The entity turned its terrible gaze upon her, and she felt her very soul begin to freeze beneath its attention. We are the first winter, it replied. The cold that existed before fire was stolen from the gods. The darkness between stars, given form and purpose. Your ancestors knew us, feared us, built their celebrations to ward against our hunger. But celebrations are hollow things, fragile things. And the guardian who maintained the seals has fallen at last. It gestured toward the journal that lay on the frozen floor, pages splayed open. She held us at bay for decades, your grandmother, as her mother did before her and her mother's mother before that. Blood and ritual, words spoken in the old tongue, herbs burned at precise moments. All to keep the gateway sealed. All to preserve your pathetic warmth for another year. The smaller creatures had spread throughout the parlor now, touching everything with their corrupting influence. The wallpaper peeled and blackened. The furniture cracked as frost invaded the wood grain. Family photographs clouded over, the smiling faces within becoming indistinct shapes, then nothing at all. But now the line is broken. The entity continued, approaching Eleanor with measured steps. The guardian is gone, and no ritual has been performed. The gateway stands open, and through it we will pour into your world. Every hearth shall become a portal. Every fireplace shall birth our kind. By dawn, the first winter will claim this realm entirely, and your celebration of warmth and light will become an eternal feast of cold and darkness." Eleanor scrambled backward until her spine pressed against the far wall. The dagger from the hidden compartment lay on the floor near the hearth, too far to reach. The parchment pages fluttered in supernatural wind, their symbols glowing faintly as if fighting against the invasion. And the bronze mirror reflected scenes of endless horror, the frozen dimension bleeding into reality with each passing second. She had failed. The gateway was open, the entities were emerging, and humanity's last Christmas was about to become its first day in frozen hell. Yet even as despair consumed her, Eleanor noticed something. The entity, for all its power, had not yet touched her directly. The smaller creatures swarmed everywhere else but kept their distance from where she pressed against the wall. Her grandmother's blood ran in her veins. Guardian blood. And guardians were not so easily dismissed. Eleanor understood in that moment what her grandmother had been preparing her for all along, even if the old woman had never spoken the truth aloud. Every Christmas spent together had been a lesson. Every story told before the fireplace had been training. Every tradition maintained had been a small act of resistance against the cold that waited beyond the flames. She was the guardian now. The power was hers by right of blood and inheritance. And the entities, for all their horrifying strength, could not claim what she refused to surrender. Eleanor rose to her feet, ignoring the cold that burned through her body. The entity that wore the corrupted form of St. Nicholas halted its approach, those burning blue eyes narrowing with what might have been surprise. The smaller creatures ceased their destruction and turned their attention toward her, sensing the shift in the room's balance. "The guardian line lives," Eleanor said, her voice stronger than she felt. "The seals may have weakened, but they are not broken. Not while I draw breath." She moved toward the hearth with purposeful steps, the frozen floor cracking beneath her feet but failing to slow her progress. The parchment pages glowed brighter as she approached, their ancient symbols responding to her presence. The dagger called to her, its lightless blade humming with anticipation. The entity snarled, and its beautiful mask of corrupted festivity slipped, revealing something far worse beneath. A face of pure ice, angular and wrong, with a mouth that split its skull horizontally rather than vertically. "You are untrained," it hissed. "Unprepared. Your grandmother spent decades learning the rituals, and even she struggled to maintain the seals. What can you hope to accomplish?" Eleanor reached the dagger and wrapped her fingers around its frozen handle. Pain lanced through her palm as cold met blood, and she felt the weapon recognize her as its rightful wielder. "I may not know the rituals," she replied, "but I know the purpose. Protection. Warmth. Light against endless dark. Every guardian who came before me gave their strength to this duty. I feel them now, standing with me, lending me their power." And she did feel them. Generations of women stretching back through centuries, each one having faced this same moment of crisis, each one having found the courage to stand against the first winter. Their presence filled her, warming her frozen bones, steadying her shaking hands. She raised the dagger and drew its blade across her palm. Blood welled from the wound, dark and hot against her frozen skin, and she let it drip onto the ancient stones of the hearth. Where the blood fell, the frost retreated. Where the blood touched stone, the carved symbols began to glow with warm golden light rather than sickly blue. The entity screamed, a sound that shattered windows throughout the house and sent its smaller servants fleeing back toward the gateway. No, the feast was promised. The cold was meant to claim this realm. "Nothing is promised," Eleanor intoned, pressing her bleeding palm against the largest symbol on the hearth. Words rose unbidden to her lips, the ancient language flowing through her as if she had spoken it all her life. "Nothing is certain. Except this. While the guardians stand, the first winter will never prevail." The golden light exploded outward from the symbol, racing through the carved patterns and filling the entire hearth with radiance. The blue flames flickered and died, replaced by normal fire that burned with natural warmth. The gateway visible within the flames began to close, the barrier between dimensions repairing itself with each word Eleanor spoke. The corrupted St. Nicholas clawed at the air, trying to maintain its grip on reality, but the golden light forced it backward. Its frozen form began to steam and crack, centuries of cold unable to withstand the combined power of every guardian who had come before. The smaller creatures shrieked as they were dragged back through the closing gateway, their corrupted forms dissolving into frost and ash. "This is not over," the entity howled as the gateway contracted around it. "We are eternal. We are patient. Another guardian will fail, another seal will weaken, and we will return. The first winter always returns. Then the guardians will always be waiting," Eleanor replied. She spoke the final word of the ritual, a sound that resonated through dimensions and sealed the gateway with the combined blood of generations. The entity vanished with a final scream of rage and hunger, pulled back into its frozen dimension. The blue light died completely, replaced by the warm orange glow of natural flames dancing in an ancient stone fireplace. Silence fell over the manor, broken only by the crackling of the fire and Eleanor's ragged breathing. She collapsed before the hearth, her wounded hands still pressed against the warm stone. The frost that had covered the parlor began to melt, water dripping from walls and furniture as impossible cold retreated. Outside the shattered windows, dawn light was beginning to touch the horizon, pale pink and gold chasing away the darkness of the longest night. It was Christmas morning. Eleanor pulled herself into the armchair and stared at the fireplace. The flames danced cheerfully, indistinguishable from any other fire in any other hearth. But she knew the truth now. She understood what lurked behind the warmth, what waited in the spaces between worlds, what her family had guarded against for generations. The wound on her palm had already begun to heal, leaving a scar in the shape of the ancient symbol she had pressed it against. A permanent reminder of her duty, her inheritance, her burden. She found her grandmother's journal among the debris and opened it to the final blank page. With trembling hands, she began to write her own entry, documenting everything that had occurred, everything she had learned, everything that the next guardian would need to know. Because there would be a next guardian. There would have to be. The first winter was patient. The first winter always returned. And somewhere in the flames of countless fireplaces around the world, the gateway waited, sealed but never destroyed, contained but never eliminated. Eleanor closed the journal and looked at the fire one last time. It seemed so innocent now, so welcoming. The epitome of Christmas comfort and warmth. But she knew better. She would always know better. Some fires burn much, much colder than they appear. Merry Christmas. The end.